a lot of attention, but I think based on the polling we've looked at, that looks like that's going to be a race that's decided fairly quickly.
Yeah, and what the polling done by our friends at the Defend Texas Liberty PAC showing mirrored then also from, I believe, the University of Houston, University of Texas at Tyler, and others showing kind of across the board Republicans winning statewide in Texas, and that for it seems like now for more than 20 years we've heard Democrats saying, "Oh, this is the year that Democrats are going to win back Texas statewide," and at some point they probably will get a statewide seat, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be this year.
Yes, and speaking of, you've got that governor's race, but also, looking down, you've got Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who looks like he's going to have an easy time tonight. And then perhaps most interestingly, when you look back at what happened in the primary and the runoff, is Attorney General Ken Paxton, who we have polling from yesterday from Defend Texas Liberty that showed heading into today among likely voters that he was leading by 6 points.
Yeah, and I think what's going to be very fascinating with that race, particularly for the Republican establishment, is you had this narrative pushed in February and March by groups like Texans for Lawsuit Reform and other kind of liberal-leaning Republican establishment groups saying, "Oh, there's no way that Ken Paxton can win." TLR didn't like the fact that Ken Paxton was suing the federal government, suing Joe Biden so much. They also didn't like his attacks on big tech, Google, and some of those. TLR kind of the default big business PAC in Texas. Meanwhile, you had the social liberals Republican Party say, "Oh, Ken Paxton's he's too close with the grassroots. He's too close with the social conservatives. He can't win in November." Can't win in November. And yet, like you say, we're seeing these polling showing, well, apparently he can win in November. And an unfortunate thing for those groups that have held a fair amount of sway in the, as the establishment in Republican politics, they're now going to have to explain to their donors why in this kind of, their projection of, their omniscience when it comes to election forecasting, that they got this one so wrong. And this is an important race. No businessman in Texas wants the Attorney General of Texas to be a Democrat. No businessman in Texas. So any threat of that, and they played along, and now they're going to find out that maybe they were the ones who were played.
Yes. If you're just joining us live right now, we're previewing the elections now, or less than 7 hours from now. The polls will begin to close in Texas, and we'll have some of those results later on tonight. But looking forward, looking at what we project to happen based on polls, based on what we've seen happening across the state, when you look at the state legislature, specifically, we've got pulled up, a map of the Texas House right now as it stands. Some of those empty districts are newly drawn districts, but this is an area where when the legislature did redistricting last year, where they redrew the maps, there was a lot of criticism that perhaps there wasn't as much opportunity for Republicans to gain even more seats. And it does look like, while perhaps there might be a couple pickups, it looks like that margin will roughly remain the same of Republicans keeping that majority in the chamber.
Yeah, I think that for whatever criticism you might be able to levy against lawmakers when it comes to budgeting, taxes, anything with public policy, the one thing they're pretty good at is drawing lines to ensure their own reelection. And so I think particularly in 2022, because of the first time these new maps are being used for representational purposes and for electoral purposes, the maps are going to perform as advertised, which is, call it 84, give or take, Republicans in the 150 member chamber, call it, 19 or 20 Republicans in the 31 member Senate. And there's always a give or take. There's always something weird that happens in any particular district. But I think that the map that you can see over Brandon's shoulder here, that this map does give us a good sense of what the state's going to look like in terms of representation. Obviously, the metro areas that are a little out, but if you go to texasscorecard.com and you click on Citizen Tools, then click Elected Officials, that's where this map comes from. And you can see those metro areas, obviously, you've got some kind of packed in Democrat seats, But I think when you look in a lot of this map and you see like up in Lubbock, that little clear area that's surrounded by red, yeah, that's also going to be colored in red by the time the evening ends. And the same is true when you look there in East Texas. So, the maps for the Texas House probably won't change that much. And the same true here for the Texas Senate. You've got maybe the one outlier, Brandon, is going to be the seat right along the Texas Gulf Coast there in far south Texas.
Right there, yeah.
That seat is an open seat where you have a Democrat trial lawyer versus a Republican car salesman. But what makes this state Senate seat significant is that it overlaps with this U.S. House seat in that same area. I'll kind of flip back and forth so that folks can see the, oh no, I made it go away. That's the fun of doing things live. Where you can see that this U.S. House seat and that state Senate seat are sitting there overlapped.
Right there, right there on the
And that's
Gulf.
where Myra Flores won that special election. The Democratic Party nationally has said, we're not competing in that congressional seat. She's going to win that. She's going to win the re-election there. And that congressional seat and the state Senate seat have a significant population overlap. The odds-on favor still has to go to the Democrat trial lawyer there, but it's going to make for an interesting race in South Texas tonight.
Yes, and keep in mind this is a seat that was vacated by a Democrat, but somebody who was a pretty moderate Democrat in Eddie Lucio.
Right.
And so there's
pro-life, good on taxes.
Pro-life, literally has endorsed Dan Patrick, the Republican, for lieutenant governor. So this is not a far left Democrat like we traditionally see in these seats. And so you could see some change there. I'm glad you mentioned, if we go back to that congressional map for just a second, we were talking about what's happening here in South Texas, and you can see there's essentially three big districts down there in the valley. The one on the far right there by the Gulf, that's the one that's currently being held by Myra Flores, essentially. And then, of course, you've got the seat Vicente Gonzalez, who she's actually running against. So there was a big switch around with the districts there. And then, but you've got a lot of movement right now of people saying that perhaps there's a movement in South Texas where there's going to be a red wave, right? Where you actually got a potential for 3 of these congressional districts. And what do you think it is that caused it this cycle to have such a flip? Because, literally just several years ago, that would have been unthinkable. In fact, this is a district that Joe Biden won 2 years ago by, I think, 13, 14, 15 points.
Yeah, so as I talk to folks down in South Texas, both the Republican and Democrat office holders down there, they all tell me the same thing, which is, you've got the white liberal kind of establishment elite of the Democratic Party, all based up in the Northeast or over on the California coast, Oregon coast, and they have a very different mindset of priorities than folks who live in South Texas. And that if you are a voter in South Texas, you've been hit incredibly hard by inflation. You've been hit incredibly hard by gas prices. You're looking at $80 billion having been sent to Ukraine and saber rattling, and you're looking at your 17-year-old son wondering, are we about to have another war going on here? All these questions going on in those voters' minds, while meanwhile you've got Joe Biden out saying, oh yeah, we're going to have abortion up until the kid's 9 years old, or whatever kind of crazy things they're pushing on abortion rights. Talking about more spending and bigger government, all of which has made Hispanic voters typically uneasy with the Democratic Party. I got a great email this morning responding to the Texas Minute in our one-click survey, saying that at the end of the day, you have to assume that my neighbors here in South Texas and the Rio Grande Valley are going to be voting Democrat, but it's only because the Democrats show up more than the Republicans do for right now. And then went on to talk about some of these issues and how there are neighbors of his who have been reliable Democrats, but are saying maybe not this time. Again, when you're paying so much for gas, and you're seeing the price of bread and milk and eggs and everything else go up every time you go to the grocery store, that does have an impact on people's voting patterns.
We talked a little bit about polling and some of those numbers heading into this race. Earlier, I got to speak with Luke Macias, political consultant, about some of those polls and what he expects to happen later on tonight when those polls close. Check it out. Luke, this has been a long election cycle. When you look back to the primaries, and we had the runoffs going back. I mean, it's been over a year of people watching this election cycle in Texas. Finally, we're going to have some results tonight. And it looks like Republicans are going to pull it off again in Texas, right? They're going to remain in charge. And this was a result that a lot of people, I think you included, predicted from the start. And yet Democrats still tried to pour a ton of money and effort into Texas.
So during the summer, we saw polling that continued to show, maybe Texas is competitive. The problem, even with those polls that showed Abbott only up by 4 or 5 and Paxton up by 1, was that you still had this huge group of undecided voters who largely were out of lockstep with the Democrat Party. They opposed their positions on immigration. They opposed their positions on the gender issue. They opposed their positions on inflation and spending. So fundamentally, these undecideds were always poised to come home to the Republican Party. What we're seeing in the last 30 days is that they have, not just with the polling Defend Texas Liberty PAC put out, but with all the other public university polling that has honestly showed Beto very competitive with Ted Cruz in 2018. Fast forward, now they're showing maybe a 10-point lead by Greg Abbott. So that's one problem. We also have the hope that this is election day and Republicans tend to do very well. I think the Republicans are more and more becoming the party of election day. And so what we're going to see is that the current advantage that exists within early voting should only widen as votes come in. So even if early voting shows a couple of these races that people are hoping maybe go Republicans' way, show up as a 1-point disadvantage when early voting comes out, I would urge people to really hold any strong opinions until the full ballots have been cast, because I think you're going to see Republicans widen whatever advantage they have statewide.
Defend Texas Liberty has put out a series of polls throughout this election looking at issues, but also looking at likely voters. Yesterday, y'all had your last poll out before the election. And those numbers, right? I mean, 11% for Greg Abbott, 8% for Dan Patrick, 6% for Ken Paxton, really show that the statewide Republicans right now are not hurting. And what does that mean then for the Republicans that might be down ballot for, say, the state legislature, especially in South Texas?
Yeah, this is where we're going to see some pretty huge advantages to Republican spending. There's been a real interesting dynamic playing throughout the election, which is that Beto O'Rourke raised over $80 million. We'll spend all of it. That's going to be a huge help to Democrats statewide. But the money got sucked up by his campaign. So in a lot of these lower placed ballot positions, Republicans are outspending Democrats 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to 1. So I think one of the things you're going to see is that many of these races are actually going to outperform the gubernatorial ballot. You're going to see them perform even better than Abbott does against Beto in some of these districts. So this is what's also making Harris County competitive. This is the largest urban county in Texas. Harris County is literally bigger than, 5, 6, 7 states in the United States of America in this county alone. And it might actually go back to Republican control countywide. This will be a huge narrative that Republicans need to be really proud of. Places like Tarrant County that everyone thought were maybe more competitive seem to be having a staunch Republican lead. So this is going to benefit the small county races, the South Texas races. In South Texas, Republicans are performing more than 10 points over what Trump performed. And here's the thing to remember. Trump was the highest vote getter in South Texas. So he outperformed John Cornyn that year. He lost. He outperformed all the other Republicans on the ballot. And yet we currently have Republicans as a whole outperforming his high watermark by sometimes 10, 12, 13, 14 points. So the shifts that are going on in South Texas are really going to be historic, and they will likely be the source of some real national conversations.
What issues are pushing that right now?
Yep. I think that culture and immigration really is a cultural issue, but think of culture being more the transgender issues, more the issues that the family values issues that are pushing some of these rural Hispanics away. Myra Flores is running in a competitive congressional district that was never supposed to be competitive. It was literally drawn as a safe Democrat district. Vicente Gonzalez moved into that from his old district because he said this one's safe. It's a plus 15 Biden district, and yet he's looking like he will lose. Most people expect him to lose by 1 or 2 points. This is an area that's not only super Hispanic over 70%, but really rural. So these people are not the Hispanics of downtown Austin. These are Hispanics who have been in Texas for multiple generations. Culturally, they've never really aligned with the Democrat Party, but the Democrat Party has never been as loud as it has now on some of those cultural issues. And then on immigration, this is what's so funny. Most of these immigration issues, I tell people, if you're a suburban mom in Highland Park, who reads the New York Times, you're way more likely to think that Donald Trump and the Republican Party are racist than you are if you're a Hispanic woman in South Texas. These people want their communities to be safe. They know that the open border policies of Biden have damaged their community, their family. So I think those issues in particular are causing these people just to leave in a bigger way than they've ever left before.
I hate to do this because Texas Scorecard, we focus on Texas, but there are other races happening across the country tonight, and some of them will have actual implications for the Lone Star State. Can you run through a few of those and maybe your predictions for those?
So as a whole, I think people should largely expect for Republicans to take Congress. It's not going to be a big surprise when that happens. The Senate is one where people are a little less sure of the outcome, but ultimately Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, these are key states to watch to see what really happens. I anticipate Republicans taking control of the Senate. The question is going to be by how much. And my hope is that we're closer to 53 or 54 seats. Of all of those races going on, I think Blake Masters probably has the largest implications because he's been one of the loudest conservative voices, which is going to have an impact on where the Senate caucus goes as a whole. And then that also plays into the fact that Kari Lake is running as his counterpart for governor in Arizona. She's leading the polls. She will outperform Blake. Honestly, incredible leader for the Republican Party. And she's already said she's going to declare an invasion very early, day one of being sworn in as governor. That's going to have greater implications. That's going to put Texas in a place where they either can side with Arizona against the Biden administration, declare an invasion like many conservatives have said they should, or stay on the sidelines, which I think will have pretty dire political consequences to our state leaders. And so I think her jumping in is going to put the pressure on Ken Paxton, Greg Abbott, Dan Patrick. And so that's going to probably be a race that matters way more when it comes to the future of Texas than any other race.
Yes, and it's going to be one that we're going to be following closely. Luke, thank you so much for your insight.
Thanks, Brandon.
And certainly, he mentioned it, that Kari Lake race is going to be very important, especially the implications it has on Texas's own border policy and what that pressures ultimately the governor and to an extent the legislature to do.
Yeah, Kari Lake has, she's kind of put all of her chips on the table and essentially said, judge me based on what I do my first day in office. And she's been very bold in saying she's going to declare an invasion of the border. She's been working with the Center for Renewing America, been working with a lot of the border hawks in describing how she is going to take action as the governor of her state as allowed by the U.S. Constitution. And look, either she's going, she's not going to do it, and she's going to upset a whole lot of people, not in Arizona but around the country. Who believed her that she would do what she said. On the other hand, she is going to do it, and she's going to upset a lot of Republican governors and Republicans around, like Greg Abbott, who are going to have to decide, gee, am I, as a governor of a red state also on the border, am I going to follow her lead, or am I going to keep hiding behind, legal briefs and things like that to justify my inaction. But that gubernatorial election, in terms of impacting Texas, we usually don't think of other states' gubernatorial elections affecting Texas, but man, Arizona absolutely does.
Big implications. So as we're watching later on tonight, as these results come in, we'll be watching what's happening in Texas, but what other races across the country are you going to be keeping an eye on in addition to that Arizona race?
Well, certainly the Arizona gubernatorial race, but I think that as we are looking at the all-important control of the U.S. Senate, I think everyone is pretty well decided that it looks like Republicans are going to take control of the U.S. House, which is why Mayra Flores keeping that seat is so important. But yet. On the other, kind of go down the hall, and then you've got the U.S. Senate, and there are a couple of races that are certainly pushing that. And you've got the Blake Masters challenge to Senator Kelly out in the West, and then you have in Pennsylvania Fetterman versus Oz, and I'm not sure Oz is many Republicans' ideal candidate in a lot of ways, but Fetterman, just a horribly sad disaster train wreck there. It'll be interesting to see, and that race could well determine, do Republicans have control of the U.S. Senate, and therefore will Republicans be able to push back against Joe Biden and these insane policies like 87,000 new IRS agents?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely insane. So we're going to be following all of that. We're going to be back live at 8 o'clock, okay, 8 o'clock Central Time, God's time, right here, live on YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're watching us live right now. We're going to be breaking down those results as they come in, not only in Texas, but we will keep an eye on maybe a couple of those races across the country as well. I think we have a giveaway as well for that 8 o'clock one, so you're going to be wanting to watch that for more details. And then again tomorrow at 9 o'clock a.m. in the morning, we're going to be looking back on what exactly these results now mean for the upcoming session, which is now just about 2 months away. And so there's certainly some implications there. And so we're going to be following all of that. Be sure to stay tuned. And if you're watching us on YouTube in particular, go ahead, hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell so you'll know when we go live here. For right now, thank you for joining. We'll see you later on.